Hey guys, my name is Walter Morello, and I want to introduce you to the story of my life. Well, maybe not my whole life, but definitely for about 2 years, this story kind of took place. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Walter Morello. I'm now a real estate investor, a real estate agent, a property manager, and now a real estate mentor. And the reason I'm writing this book is because I was driving with my buddy Bruno, and we were going through the city, and I was telling him all the different things I've done, and he asked me a couple key questions. I'm going to go through those questions and just put them down into a place where other people can read them. That way, I'm adding a little bit of value. I guess my story is a story of how you can come from nothing to something. You know, it's all relative. But long story short, I had nothing. I was actually worth less than I came into the world with. That's negative money. And I've come up to this story when it was going down $250,000. I'm actually significantly higher than that now, and continue to double that every single year. It's a strategy that I've taken on, and I continue to do. But the first question that he asked me was, was my family rich, or were they in real estate already? And I want to clarify, because I get asked this a lot. By no means was my family even close to being rich. They're all hard workers. They still are. They're all still working very hard. They've always had enough to get by, but by no means was my family rich at all. So to give you a little look into that, my father was not born here. He was born in Portugal, and his parents actually came here when he was 6 years old. They brought him over from the Azores in search for a better income, and they worked in the factories. They were mill workers. And then my father, who had me at 24 years old, got married when he was 20 years old to my mother, who was 17 at the time. And they were married young and had no education, no college education. They had high school, but my mother was actually a dropout. She dropped out in the second grade. So education was not something they had. They weren't taught financial wealth. The only thing that they did have that was real estate related was my grandparents did buy a 3-family home. Eventually, they saved up money over time, and they did eventually buy a 3-family home here in the city of Fall River, which I was raised in. My parents never owned a house. The entire time that I was building my empire, my family never had anything other than the multifamily that my grandparents had actually bought. So it wasn't like anybody in my family other than my grandparents had actually bought a house. So no, certainly we're not rich. Very little exposure to real estate. I did grow up in a 3-family in Fall River, so that was something that I kind of saw. It was always in the back of my head. Like, my grandfather was a landlord. I knew that. I knew that landlords seemed to have money, but I didn't really kind of grasp what that meant or why. I just knew that that my grandfather was a landlord, and I wasn't allowed to do certain things in the house because there was people upstairs, there's people downstairs. We couldn't run, we couldn't bang, we couldn't make noise. I just remember a lot of my friends didn't have those rules, but it was just like life. You didn't really worry about it. It was just something that existed. But I knew that my father always had to work. He always had 2-3 jobs. He was busting his butt, and I remember there always being a lot of tension in the family or in the house around money, because it was always scarce. It always seemed like it was disappearing. There wasn't enough. There was never enough to get by. And me and my brother, growing up, we just assumed that that's how life was. We didn't know anything different. We knew that we had to go to school, we had to get good grades, and one day we'd get a good job. I remember thinking that, okay, my dad makes $40,000 a year, so that's what I want to make. If I can make that, then I'll be all set. I'll be doing really good. Other things my mom put in my head was that if I had $30,000 in the bank, then I could start dating somebody. So she set me up with these weird rules in my head where it was like I couldn't date somebody until I was ready to marry them, and you couldn't marry them until you were ready to buy a house. And I believed that a house was purchased with a 20% down payment, which meant I had to have $30,000 in the bank. This is the math that I knew was in my head from the age of 15 or 16. That was the sort of stuff that's put in my head. And here I am. My parents don't own a house. They're married, but they don't own a house. They're telling me I should buy one because that was a mistake they made. So I was like, okay, don't make the same mistakes as my parents. They're trying to set me up. The don't do as I did, do as I say sort of mentality. And the other benefit, I think my father was always telling me that real estate is the key to getting rich. Like if you want to be wealthy, the rich get richer and the poor stay poor, and the rich own real estate. He'd always say that. He said, you always work hard, work hard, work hard, save your money, and you want to invest it. The funny thing is, my father never invested it. My mother never invested. Like to this day, they still have no investments. Although we do talk about it now, and my father's getting his real estate license. He's looking to come on my team, and we're going to start working together, doing some flips and doing some of the work that I do already. But it's just interesting, like no, I did not come from real estate. No, I did not come from any kind of money whatsoever. But I did come from a strong work ethic, and that I think was one of the beginning pieces that set me up to succeed in life. The other thing that people ask me all the time is, what school did I go to? So I actually grew up in Fall River, but I stopped at the second grade. There was some sort of situation, I barely remember it. I believe there was a report where my mom felt that they were invading privacy. It was one of the things that your parents do that you think is really silly, and like I don't remember what I wrote. I was like, maybe they forget things that they're supposed to remember, or something like that. But somebody else in the class had written something that was pretty interesting, where you kind of got into some of the domestic dispute stuff in the family, and my mom thought that was invasion of privacy. She said, I'm pulling my kids out of school, I'm gonna homeschool them, because she dropped out at 10th grade and she was clearly qualified to handle that. But the benefit to being homeschooled was obviously not the social aspect, since it was just me and my brother. Fortunately, I do have some close friends that I grew up with. They lived next door. The community was pretty tight, so I still have a lot of those friends, and I had to build my social skills elsewhere. I did not gain my social skills from school like everybody else did. That was something I had to work on, because initially I was quite the introvert. Now you'll see me speaking in front of rooms with 50, 100 people, and I don't even sweat. It's not even a problem. I actually genuinely enjoy getting in front of people and have those conversations. But it wasn't all, I had to build that. So being homeschooled did instill some really good qualities in me, and me and my brother, and that was that you can learn absolutely anything if you want the knowledge bad enough. And you don't always have to specifically be told or taught something. Sometimes you have to go out and dig for that information on your own, because my mom couldn't answer the questions, right? When it came to math, my mom didn't know. When it came to certain levels of history, she didn't know. When it came to certain different things, me and my brother had to go back through the book and try to figure it out on our own. Like, hey, where was this answer? They said it somewhere in here. It must have. So that digging for knowledge, digging for resources, and not being able to just rely on or being taught to you was one of the strengths that I still use today. Like when I don't know something, it just means that I need to go dig for that answer. It means that it's somewhere out there and I'm going to get it. And I'm going to find that answer, I'm going to find that knowledge. So that was one of the strengths of being homeschooled. I don't think that everybody comes out of homeschooling with that value or that lesson. I'm not saying go homeschool your children, but I turned a weakness into a positive. Right, I was not socially excellent at that time in my life, and I certainly did not have easy access to knowledge. But I found a way. I'd go and I'd read the books, or this was pre-internet, so even though the internet was coming in, we didn't have it, because again, we were very, I'm not going to say poor, but we didn't have money. So eventually we did have computers, but during that time, it was very much, you got an encyclopedia, we had dictionaries, and we had the school books that my mom was able to buy for us that we would dig through and just try to find whatever it was, wherever the answer was, somewhere in there. And that was my education, was just going through these books that she would buy for each year. And then we did take some tests at the end of the year to evaluate and make sure that we knew what we were doing. Because the city does like to see, and the state does like to see, that you're actually participating and teaching your kids. So, do I have a college degree? Is another question that comes up all the time. So this used to actually embarrass me, right? People say, oh, did you go to college? And I'd say, oh, well, I took 2 semesters in college. And the only thing I had going for me was that I did have a 4.0 when I was in college, right? Because I didn't go to college right away. I finished homeschooling and I jumped right into work. I dove right into, I've been working since I was 12 years old, so I'd always been working, but it was working little retail jobs, and then at 21 or Yeah, 21 I got a really hard labor job, but at 18 I started working at Walmart, and I thought I was the man because within 6 months I was a manager, a department manager, and within another 6 months I was a department manager of a different department, and I was really doing really well at $10 an hour, which was fine because I was able to buy a truck and I was happy and I was living life just working hard, thinking I was saving money, and I was saving money. I was doing pretty good until I bought that truck, and it kind of stopped my bank account from going up. So after a year, seeing my bank account at $38, I said I got to do something, and I went to another job where I was making $18 an hour, but it was a sweatshop. It was just hard labor, third shift, physical labor, working in a bakery. It was like 100 degrees every single day, and in the summer it was like 120. But I learned hard work. I learned, dedication. There was overtime like crazy, and I discovered that I don't like this. I do not like hard work. I do not like physical labor because it wasn't creative. It wasn't me being able to be my authentic self. So my girlfriend at the time, she said, hey, you know what? If you don't like that, why don't you go to college? Why don't you get a degree? So I was going for business management. I was going for marketing, and I ended up getting a job in accounting. So. And that was up in Boston. That was an hour away. I was driving every day for 4 years. I did that job. But so I didn't get the degree. But what I did do was get enough education to get me into a job, right? And I learned management. I took a couple courses in accounting. I took a couple courses in marketing. And those were the pieces that I still use those pieces today. I still use Excel. I still use marketing. I still use business management. And those were key classes. It wasn't about getting the degree to me. It was about how do I get what I need to build a business, because I always knew I was going to business owner. I always knew that owning a business was my goal. So no to the college degree. It doesn't bother me now. Now I say, you know what, if you don't have one, good. You're in the same spot as me. You can succeed because you don't have a degree and you haven't gotten all that bad programming of just study and do nothing with it. So what did you do before this? I think I kind of preluded into that, but before this I was working in retail, and then I worked physical labor, and I worked as a financial, what was I? I was a billing representative for a computer company up in Boston, and then I worked for Johnson & Johnson for a short time. I started figuring out if I jumped companies, they'd give me a pay raise. I would be doing less work, but because I had a different title at that company, I could shift my resume and put in a different title, and I'd be able to get paid more. So I started doing that. I said, okay, this company's willing to pay me this at this title. So here I'm a billing representative, but now in Johnson & Johnson, I'm a sales representative. Boom, that jumped me up. And then I slid over to Coca-Cola as a planning analyst, and that jumped me up. And then Johnson & Johnson called me back. They wanted an administrative assistant for the vice presidents of sales. So I went back to Johnson & Johnson, and that was kind of my career. I was a planning analyst. I would sit down, look at spreadsheets, see what needed to be done, and then go and get the machines to run it. And then for a little while, in my last role, I was a administrative assistant to vice presidents. I booked their flights and little things like pay their Amex cards and little stuff like that. And I just realized I really, really, really hate doing this. Like, I actually hate helping people do the tedious stuff that I wish I had somebody else to do for me. So now, like, I'm looking for an assistant to do all this stuff for me because I just hate it. I honestly hate it. And I was literally doing it for a job. I was doing it for other people. I didn't even like to do it for myself. So that was what triggered me getting out of real estate. I was making $70,000 a year. My expenses were well under that. I probably spent $30,000 a year. Maybe there was like $2,000 a month that I really lived off of. And I was just having this exorbitant amount of money. I did not need it. So I was always a $40,000 person, and then suddenly I started making all this money, and I started buying real estate because that made sense to me at the time. I said, I'm going to replace my funds with real estate. So what was the moment you knew there was more? So I remember cutting my grass. So I bought a single family home when I was 22 years old, and I was with my girlfriend at the time. And I remember just being out there cutting the grass thinking, yeah, I'm the lord of the land. I got all this land. It's all mine. And nobody's paying me rent. And I'm working, paying a mortgage for $1,400 a month. And I got to pay the water bill, I got to pay the electric, I got to pay the heat, I got to maintain the lawnmower, I got to maintain the fences, I got to cut this grass. I'm doing all this work, but all I have is a house. Like, where is the money? Why did I buy this thing that doesn't pay me? And for some reason, I don't know, like, I'm thinking of my grandfather who has this three family that pays him to do all this work. Actually, it was a four family. Now that I think about it, it was actually a first, second, and then split level on the third floor, four family. And I'm the landlord, he's the landlord, but he's getting paid, and I'm not. I just remember having this very frustrating conversation in my head where I was just very upset with myself for putting myself into a situation where I spent all this money and I didn't have something that actually benefited my life. It made me feel like I was something, but it didn't actually pay me. I was stuck working because of this house. Something about it, I just realized in that moment, like, I don't want to do this anymore. So what about stocks? So people ask all the time. Now cryptocurrency is big. Bitcoin's on the rise, and everybody's coming up to me saying, "Oh, well, what about Bitcoin? Are you in this? What do you think?" And I'll tell you the same thing Warren Buffett says to everybody is, "Look, I don't understand it. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to invest in it. I understand real estate, and so this is what I invest in." And the money that's being made in cryptocurrency, yes, absolutely, there's money there. If you understand it, more power to you. But I don't, and so I don't invest in it. I understand real estate. I understand it well. I can make money no matter what the market's doing, and so that's what I do. I did day trade for a little while, and I realized I wasn't very good at it. The problem with me in day trading was I'd make a little bit of money, and then I'd do something dumb and I'd lose the money, and then I'd make a little bit of money and I'd do something dumb and I'd lose the money. So I couldn't really control whether it was going up or down. I couldn't add value to the company. So it wasn't something I could fix when it went the wrong way. Whereas real estate, you can actually really get into the property and turn it into something else. You can make money a different way. You can adjust the use. You can fix it, renovate it, increase rents. There's all sorts of different things you can do to a property to make sure that it generates extra income. Um, so why real estate? Real estate was exactly that reason, because I realized that in real estate, I had control. Also, I read somewhere in a blog that 80% of millionaires made their money through real estate. And that was kind of good math for me. I said, well, if 80% of them are doing it this way, I'm not going to try to do it. 20% are doing it. Those guys are probably, Bitcoin and stuff and companies and things. But real estate, if 80% are doing it, I'm just going to go to the bigger brand. Pareto principle is 80-20 rule. I said, I'm going to do the 80% to give me 80% of the results. So I went after it. And it was interesting because once I made the decision to get into real estate, people started popping up everywhere. I started talking about it at work. I was working at Johnson & Johnson, and this woman I worked with, Sharon, she said, "Oh, my husband is a real estate investor. In fact, he used to manage 100 properties, and we own a place in Florida, we own a place in Boston, we own a place in the Cape, and we can live in any one of them at any time. And yeah, they're worth well over $1 million, and everything's kind of taken care of by a tenant." And I'm listening to her, and I'm just like having one of those moments where I'm like, oh my God, this is real? Like, people actually make money in real estate and they're millionaires? Like, here, like where I live, there's people who can live in Florida and can live on the Cape and they can live in Boston at whenever they want. It was one of those moments. It was like very shattering for me. It was like I was reading all this stuff online and studying and building this spreadsheet with all these numbers, but they were all fake until I finally met her husband, and he told me, yeah, it's this, it's that. I mean, he said a lot of stuff. There was GRM, there was cap rates, there was all sorts of stuff in those conversations. My mind was just like, I don't understand any of this, but man, like, he does, which means I can. Because when I was homeschooled, I learned that I could learn anything if I just dug hard enough. So he was my first mentor. And when people ask, did you take any classes to get into real estate? I honestly didn't. I do believe that the classes have a place. I do believe that mentorship, coaching, taking these classes from all these different companies has a place. And I didn't even know about them. I didn't know that there were courses out there I could have taken in real estate. I just knew that I wanted to learn, and I knew that I didn't have money. And so I started digging online. I started reading books. I started asking people in the community who they knew who owned real estate. And whenever I found somebody who owned property, I went and I took them out to lunch, or I asked them questions. I said, what do you know? How can I get more knowledge about this? So I remember I took her husband out to dinner or out to lunch, and I asked him a bunch of questions. And then he introduced me to my first true mentor, Jim Baptista, he was just phenomenal. He owned a bunch of property and he was willing to take me under his wing. He was a real estate agent and he helped me buy my first property. He helped me buy my second property, and then he mentored me when I got my real estate license later on. And I know today that I would not be the man I am today if it wasn't for Jim being in my life. He's still in my life. He'll still call me up every so often and just check in on me, see how I'm doing. And at this point, I may even have more property than he does, but I still like to call him. I still like to check in and see what I'm doing wrong or what I'm doing right, just because he's always been a genuine good person that, like, I know I owe it to him. If he did not take me under his wing, I wouldn't be where I am today. So the mentors out there, they're huge, and I genuinely appreciate the people who stepped up. Now I've had tens of mentors, tens, maybe hundreds by the time I die, but there's quite a few now who've really helped me get to where I am. So finding a mentor is huge, and if you can find a good one, they'll take you a long way.